So if love can grow deeper and stronger, the longer you're married, you may love your spouse differently than you did as, say, a newlywed. And my next guest says you may treat them differently too. Studio 5 parenting contributor Heather Johnson wants you to reflect on those first few years of marriage, think way back, and try to bring back some of those habits that newlyweds do so well. Heather's joining me in studio. May, of course, is the start of wedding season. Is that what tipped your brain to this topic?
It is. Yep, it's the start of wedding season. Like, we've got 3 months, right, where we're going to be attending them and supporting them and being involved in them.
So you think of newlywed bliss, we go gaga, we're ooey gooey. Is that what we're talking about?
Not so much. Nope, we're not necessarily talking about that, although you can bring that back too.
Oh,
that,
sure.
That should be part of our
Never say no to the
relationships,
ooey gooey.
There's really important things that we can learn from this stage in our marriage. One, when we look at newlyweds, they are very, very intentional. They're intentional about how they do things, what they say, their interactions, their time together. That intentionality is something we tend to lose over the course of our marriages. So that intentionality is really important. Looking at newlyweds too matters because they're not tainted quite yet. Right? They don't have those challenges and the stresses and strains that come with family and work and 20 plus years of marriage as we go. And so they have this perspective where they haven't started comparing and they're not worried about if things are fair and they still have ears to hear one another. These are habits we want to make sure that we hold on to.
I think of how they prioritize too. They prioritize each other.
All the time, right? And then we've got this other perspective that newlyweds can give us, which is the things that we do as newlyweds are actually the things that have been proven to create happy marriages over time. Those things that we did when we were first married are the exact things that help keep us married.
Isn't that funny? So for all they haven't experienced or for all they've yet to figure out, they actually have figured out some stuff that we could learn from too.
The most important of things. We do those things right at the beginning, and it's over time that we lose that energy and coherence. So we want to always be remembering them, and more than remembering, we actually want to do them. We want to hang on to them.
First, you want us to think of our responses one to another.
How we respond to one another. So some new research just came out, a report saying that the #1 predictor of divorce is a husband's ability to listen and respond to his wife. Now, before that sounds like whatever your wife says goes, that's not what we're saying, right? Before we get that direction, the research is showing that a husband's ability to respond to his wife when she comes to him and says, today was hard, or when she wants to chat about a new chair she thinks would look nice in the family room, or when she's worried about a 3-year-old that had a hard time at preschool, just simply knowing for a wife that her husband is there to respond and validate, that is now being found as the #1 predictor of divorce.
It's not the sure honey, yes honey, buy the chair. It's just the in the moment attentiveness.
It's the validation, it's the attentiveness, it's the caring. Now think back to when we're first married. We care about everything our spouse says.
Yeah, they care,
right?
we care.
We all are caring about each other. I mean, I think about how many conversations my husband, when we got married, was taking an anatomy class. I can't tell you how many conversations we had about his anatomy class, right? And that mattered, and so it mattered to me, right? And vice versa. We want to respond like we did in those newlywed days when we actually cared about what the other person said. No matter how big or no matter how small, we cared.
You want us to remember the why, as in, why did we fall in love in the first place?
So it's interesting. The reasons that we fell in love with each other in the first place tend to be the exact things that irritate us over time.
Isn't that funny?
The exact same things.
And true.
Right?
I can see that.
So little things, or they become big. Like, so let's say that I fell in love with my husband because he's spontaneous, and he loves that. And yet, 10 years down the road with a couple kids, his spontaneity can be frustrating because I can see it as not taking into consideration what it takes to get 4 kids ready to go in 12 seconds to go have an adventure.
Right.
And now they start to frustrate us. Their sense of humor, their hard work, their devotion, we tend to see them as annoying over time. We've got to remember why we fell in love with each other in the first place and hang on to that.
I mentioned how newlyweds seem to prioritize. They also sacrifice for each other. They give up something for you or your interests or your comfort or your needs. And you say we could do a better job of that later in marriage.
We do. We start to forget that need to sacrifice. Again, think about all the sacrifices you made when you were first married. We were constantly asking ourselves one question, which was, what can I do to help lighten their load today? How can I make their life easier? But if we ask ourselves that now, how often do we wake up and think, or the night before go to bed and think, what can I do tomorrow to make their day easier? How can I lighten that load? What sacrifices can I make? We were willing to sacrifice anything for each other, right? And then we lose that coherence over time. So this ability to sacrifice is so important. It also matters that we're willing to show affection to each other.
Okay, because we joked about the
We
ooey
did,
gooey, but
we
the
did.
physical has a place in this
It
conversation.
does have a place. And we want to make sure that that affection is there, not just in intimate spaces. We want to be showing affection in all different spaces, right? Remember, you held hands when you were driving. You opened doors. You put your hand on one another's shoulder or the small of your back as you walked into places.
You would try to touch just because.
Just because, right? In fact, it was the other way, the ooey gooey, where people were like, stop touching, enough touching. But we need that.
Yeah.
There is miraculous things that happen when we show affection. It lets someone else know, recognize that they're there. And wouldn't it be great now, 5, 10, 15, 30 years down the road, to just have a moment where you see that your spouse recognizes that you're there, or you've done the same for them. So this affection is a really big deal, and it goes really quick. We give it to kids, we give it to other people, but we forget to give it to each other.
I love your words around that. Doesn't it soften everything
It does.
as well? A subtle touch, like just a little handhold, or like you said, a touch on the back. All the annoyances you described, the frustration that comes from married life 30 years later, it softens with just a simple touch.
It does. Even when there's conflict, right? It's amazing what happens when there's affection and physical touch, what it does with conflict.
I love this next one. You are challenging us to defend our spouse.
Yes. Okay, so let's go back to those newlywed days, right? Where it didn't matter what anyone said about your spouse. You did not have ears to hear it.
You
right?
only had hearts in your eyes.
You only had giant hearts in your eyes, right? Like in cartoons that were just exploding all the time. And so we were very quick to tell other people all the good things about our spouse, all the good things that we saw, the way that they were working hard, the way that we connected with them. And over time, we lose that to where we find ourselves complaining about them. We're not defending them. When kids, is a good example, have a complaint about our spouse, instead of jumping on the bandwagon, we should be there to defend our spouse to them, to family members, to anyone. We lose that. We jump on that same bandwagon, and oftentimes we're the ones leading the charge to say, what you're doing is so annoying, and that's so frustrating to me. We have to hold on to that defense for one another, protect one another.
I love that.
Again, there is so much peace in knowing that you are being protected.
Yes.
And to say I love you and not follow it up with, and that means I will always protect you.
Yeah.
It is very hard to feel connected to someone if we're not protecting each
So
other.
in defense of marriage and in defense of him or
Yes.
her or them. Finally, making time for one
Yes.
another.
Again, something that slips away that we stop doing, right? Go back to those newlywed days. We would sacrifice anything to have time together.
Oh, you
right?
craved that time.
You would do anything. I mean, the late nights, the bad grades. I'm pretty sure my statistics grade in graduate school was what it was.
I was going to say, what
because
did Billy get in anatomy?
yeah, well, he did better than I did in statistics, I'll tell you that. And so when we look at those and realize we were willing to do whatever it took to have time together, and now everything gets in the way. Now there's this natural feeling that because we're married, that relationship can withhold all of the negligence. And although it is a strong relationship, making time for it is what keeps it strong. And so we've got to make sure we hang on to. Again, look at the way we did it when we were newlyweds. We had it figured out. We sacrificed, we defended, we made time, we showed up, we did all of these things. That's what got us together. It's those things that got us together that actually help us stay together. And they just make the everyday so much better.
I love all of this advice, this counsel, great reminders for any stage of your marriage or your relationship. Heather, thank you so much. Heather has a private practice. You can find her contact information on our website.